Hey everyone, this is Jay Stein, and this is the Dynasty Investor series on the Devi Royale YouTube channel. And today we're going to look at value at the QB position. This corresponds with an article I have out on the Football Guys called the Dynasty Investor QB Value, and is linked in the comments section below. We're going to look at a bunch of charts on the QB position broken up into clusters and talk about the buys and sells. Key points up front: if you need a QB that scores points but you don't want to break the bank, Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson are your guys. And to a lesser extent, Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott look cheap relative to their peers. If you're rebuilding, go buy Trey Lance. Joe Burrow, Derek Carr, Kenny Pickett, Jordan Love look expensive relative to their peers. And Russell Wilson, Matt Stafford look like the veterans you can take a shot on at a much lower cost, but they do come with some risk. Let's get to work. So first off, the Dynasty Investor is about looking at a player's keep trade cut versus his fantasy points per game in a ratio called the PE ratio, or the price to earnings ratio. Then you compare that player's PE ratio to a like-for-like cluster of players from an age and production and potential perspective. The players in the same cluster should be valued at similarly at a PE basis. So if they aren't, then there's an arbitrage opportunity that exists to create value. And again, KeepTradeCut is a website that uses crowdsourcing by asking people that visit the site whether they keep, trade, or cut certain players. And then they take those answers, they have an algorithm that comes up with values, and I use those values as my prices. It's basically a sentiment indicator. So let's take a look at some of these charts here, right? So visually, here are the clusters broken up into age on the y-axis and then points per game estimates on the x-axis. And you can see this was actually an idea from Billy Jones at NFL_Billy_Jones, who read my QB value article and then came up with this awesome idea to make this sort of into a visual chart. But you can see on the right-hand side, the QBs, their age, and their estimated points per game. And then on the left-hand side of the chart, you can see these guys broken up into clusters based the color represents each of the clusters. The lines are sort of breaking these guys into different zones and different clusters here. If you start at the bottom left, those are the guys that are the young guys. They're less than 25 years old, and their estimated score between that 14 and 16 fantasy points per game. And then as you move to the right, you pass Trey Lance and you go to the bottom right-hand side, and that is Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, and Trevor Lawrence into that cluster. So those are young guys that will score above 20 fantasy points per game. And then if you go up from the Hurts cluster to the big dogs, that's age 25 to 28, that score greater than 20 fantasy points per game. And that gets you into the cluster of Mahomes, Josh Allen, Burrow, Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Murray, and Watson. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down each one of these clusters, and we're going to talk about each of them from a charting perspective, right? So here is your first cluster. These are the guys that are age 25, 28 that score 20 plus fantasy points per game. These are the main group, the best group of quarterbacks for fantasy purposes. So this chart visualizes the clusters KTC since May 2020, approximately 3 years. The max value a player can get in KTC is around 10,000, or is 10,000. Mahomes has been in the high 9,000s for the entire 3 years. Allen has a tremendous 2020 season and then spent the next 2 years with the Mahomes at the high 9,000s. Burrow's had a more up and down 3 years. He starts very close to where Allen is, then moves down during the off seasons and up through the seasons and peaks at higher highs as the fantasy season comes to a close. Lamar Jackson's sort of the opposite of Burrow in that his peaks happen early to midway through the season, and then his price falls off as you get towards the end of the season and then where it levels off. Justin Herbert, the youngest of this group, the 25 to 28-year-old group, cluster, starts his rookie year on 4,500 KTC as there was a little bit of uncertainty about what he might become. He quickly skyrockets up, including spending the end of 2021 season and the entire offseason with Mahomes and Allen's in the very high 9,000 range, but falls back down after a somewhat disappointing season in 2022. Murray has spent some significant time at the very top of this chart as one of the pricier QBs, but fell hard into the offseason last year and then again during the season in 2022 after his injury, and even before his injury. The most volatile price movement probably comes from Watson, whose off-the-field issues have led to significant price swings throughout this chart. And then finally, that's the pink line here is the QB index. It represents the top 24 QBs in KTC over this same time horizon. So they're all basically averaged together. And it shows sort of the pricing trends of the entire group over those 3 years. So looking at these charts, Mahomes and Allen, I'd agree, are probably different. Those guys are hold. But if you think Burrow, Herbert, Jackson, Murray, Watson can score similar points per game, then Jackson, Murray, and Watson sort of look cheaper than the group. I'm actually advocating a sell for Burrow and a buy for Kyler and Deshaun Watson, and to a lesser extent, Lamar Jackson. You can find all that in the article. So let's take a look at Watson's individual chart. He has bounced off his 2021 lows and based for a while now. So the setup looks actually fairly good for him to bounce up above his average line here. That's that red dash line going through the center, and stay above the 150-day moving average, which is that solid red line. All this is detailed in the article, but I have a price target for him of around 6,500 KTC, which represents about 20% upside from current levels. As far as trading goes, I'm really into this compounding process where, so you trade down the pricing curve, but keeps the points the same, but collect the extra. So I'm recommending you sell Joe Burrow for Deshaun Watson. And, if you plug that into KCC, that if the extra is early first and a late first. So you're getting Deshaun Watson plus 2 firsts for Joe Burrow. Picks wise, if you just want to buy Deshaun Watson for picks, it's a mid first plus a late third, which I'd gladly play. And then I'd be interested in trading guys like a Dameon Pierce plus a second for Watson. There's lots of options that you can do here, but the chart looks fairly good for him to move up above that average line and get to a price target around 6,500. And now let's take a quick look at Joe Burrow's chart. This one looks a little bit extended. You can see that his price is up well above his +1 standard deviation. It's well above the average. I think there's going to be pressure coming down. There's lots of reasons why, and I outline that in the article. But I think his target price should be around 7,700, which is around 20% downside from current levels. Right now in KTC, if you did Joe Burrow, you could get Kyler Murray plus Bijan Robinson for Joe Burrow. I think that's absurd. I'm not sure if that is something you can actually get done, but that's kind of what you're looking for. I'm looking for a guy that scores similar points and then a whole bunch of extra, and that's what you can get for Joe Burrow right now. So if you're into practicing that compounding is what I talk about in the series. A sell of Joe Burrow might make sense right now. If you're just selling Burrow for picks straight up, it'd be 3 first round picks, 3 mid first round picks for Joe Burrow. That isn't exactly how I'd be viewing it, because if I was to sell Burrow, I'd want at least 1 QB back to make things work out. So it's not exactly 3 mid first round picks, but that's the type of return that you can get from selling a Joe Burrow. So now we're going to go on to the next cluster. We're going to look, we're going to go just basically straight down to the bottom right-hand corner, and we're going to look at age 20, less than 25, and 20 fantasy points per game or greater. So that's the Hurts, Fields, Lawrence cluster. And so here is their chart graphing their KTC over the past 3 years. Jalen Hurts was a second-round pick, and there was tremendous skepticism on if he was good. That was reflected in his KTC around 2,500 to start off the chart. Remember where Justin Herbert started, and think about now where Jalen Hurts started, and kind of how they've trended and where they are right now. So Hurts starts playing, and his price doubles to the 5,000 range, and then holds there for about a year and a half, as there continues to be a ton of skepticism about what Hurts is. And finally, last year, Hurts takes off and has an incredible almost 26 fantasy points per game season, up there with Mahomes and Allen. And now he's the 3rd highest priced QB on KTC. Hurts is a fantastic story, a hard-fought story, and you can't help but root for the guy. He doesn't look too expensive though, because he scores that differentiated amount of fantasy points. So I'm not really selling him at the moment. Lawrence and Fields were given the benefit of the doubt as rookies with high starting KTC levels. Then they both had a disappointing rookie seasons, and their KTCs fell quite a bit. And about midway through last season, they pulled it together, and their prices popped up to around basically where they started when they were rookies, which is very interesting. Fields looks like a relative value versus Lawrence. I think there's the difference between Hurts and the other two right now, just because of what Hurts was able to do in terms of, almost 26 fantasy points per game, 25.6 fantasy points per game. Lawrence and Fields aren't there yet, but I personally, the way I see it, I'd be flipping out of Trevor Lawrence into Justin Fields and collecting my early second or late first to do that. That's about where the value is. And when Justin Fields, when he dips, I'd be buying on Justin Fields dips. That's kind of how I'd be looking at that cluster of where the value is. And so now we're going to go into the middle left cluster. And we're going to look at H quarterbacks 25 to 28 that score 16 to 20 fantasy points per game. And we're talking about Jared Goff, Tua, and Daniel Jones here. And so let's look at their chart here. So these QBs, you can see the pink line, that's the QB average of the top 24 QBs. Now we're starting to see these QBs that are kind of living below this average QB index line. So just focus on the 2022 season. Tua and Jones finished right on top of each other, but took very different paths. Tua made a strong push early in the season, but injuries got the best of him, concussions, and he fell off shortly. Jones pushed up from the land of QB irrelevance last year in the new Dable-led offense, to the point that the community may actually be getting a little bit excited about him. And then Goff had a strong push to the end of 2022 season and probably earned himself at least another year of starting for the Detroit Lions. So all of these guys actually look like holds. There's nothing that looks too expensive or inexpensive. I think what's interesting on this chart to me is last season, sort of the mirror images of Tua Tagovailoa and Jared Goff, where Tua bursts out and basically at the same time Goff is like tanking pretty hard, and then they kind of reverse there at the end. It's a pretty interesting chart to the way you look at those. So now we're going to move on to the next cluster here. We're going to go to the older guys, right? So these are age 29 plus that score 16 to 20 fantasy points per game. That's the upper left-hand corner of this chart. So this is another interesting chart. As you can see, they're living below that pink QB line. In fact, the only chart that actually isn't is Russell Wilson, who the first 2 years of this chart, he's above that. So of all these guys, he's the one, the potential that I could see actually moving back above that line at some point if he's able to put it all together. So this is an intriguing chart. The KTCs are all very similar, so much so that at the end of the chart, I had to actually add a magnifier into this chart to distinguish which are the lines that are coming on top and which are on the bottom. If you take a look at Stafford, actually is at the bottom here. He maybe looks like the value of the chart. And like we discussed before, Russell Wilson is the one that has the potential, like if you can put it all together and get back to old form, to get back above that pink line. You can see at the very end, you can see Rodgers, just like Lamar Jackson, his ticks up at the very end after he gets his Jets trade. So, where he looked like maybe he could be in buy, now he's more of a hold. Cousins looks like a hold, but I can think of worse QB1 guys that are valued like QB2 guys. So, he's not the worst hold. Carr and Geno Smith. Geno's a late riser. He actually, on this chart, he would actually be the top one of these this group on a KTC basis, even though it's really hard to see that at the end. So Carr and Geno actually look like a little bit overvalued, look like maybe the sells of this group. And then Russ and Stafford, they look like sort of the buyers, the values maybe of this group. It doesn't cost very much to get Russ. He's an early second at the moment. That's the guy I'd try and get. If it costs even less to get a Stafford, maybe a late second, maybe in late third, but it's all on whether he can get healthy, remain healthy, but he would probably be the bargain guy for QB needy squads if you're out there and you really need a QB for cheap. So there's a bunch of guys that we haven't talked about. So, Dak in the top right quadrant there. He looks a little undervalued. Go and check out the article where I break things out on him. Lance, he's at the bottom in between the two, between the left side and the right side there. So he's somewhere in no man's land right now. I think we're going to add a few players to his clusters with the rookie class. So we'll have a better evaluation. But I think if you're on a rebuilding team, I think you should go out and buy Lance. Picks wise, Lance works out to be about a late first. I'd be interested in trading Kenny Pickett maybe straight up for Trey Lance. Also be interested in selling like a Dameon Pierce straight up for Lance, even if I had to add a little bit to make that work. So also if I'm rebuilding, I'd be interested in selling maybe one of those aging veterans plus a little extra, or maybe even you don't need the extra to take a chance on Lance's upside. Again, go and check out that article for more valuation support and reasoning on why you should buy Lance. And then the bottom left-hand quadrant that where I have the younger, sort of the lower points per game guys, Pickett, Mac Jones, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love. Pickett is my sell in that group. Pickett and even Love is actually looking a little expensive now, but Pickett, I'd be trading straight up for Lance. I'd be very interested if I can, this is where I'd be very interested. I'd be interested if I can add a second to get up to, maybe it's an early second, to get up to Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. My highest priority would be to add that second or more to get into the Kyler Murrays or the Deshaun Watson from a dynasty perspective. That's what makes the most sense to me. Yeah, so that's how I'm looking at the value perspective. Again, if you want to score points but you don't want to break the bank, Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson look good. And to a lesser extent, Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott look cheap relative to their peers. If you're rebuilding, I'm very interested in going and grabbing Trey Lance, Joe Burrow, Derek Carr, Kenny Pickett, Jordan Love, a few others. They look a little expensive relative to their peers. And if you're looking for that cheap veteran, Russell Wilson would probably be number one there for me. And then Matthew Stafford would be guys that I'd probably take shots on for a lower cost. Matt Stafford doesn't really cost very much at all, but those guys do come with risk. So it doesn't help you if Matt Stafford doesn't even play. So you have to weigh the cost with the risk that it takes to for him. So that's it. Go check out the article on the Football Guys for a more in-depth discussion and some more data around this process. Please like, comment, and subscribe below, and join up on the Devi Royale Patreon if you're not already. You can find me on Twitter @_Jason Stein, and thank you so much for watching. See you again next week.